Hello everybody, my name is Katie. Welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, I'm doing a little bit of like a tips and tricks video, I guess. It's how I studied for the MPJE and how I was able to pass on my first try taking it. So the MPJE, I probably should have made sure this is correct. Multi-Practice Jurisdiction Examination, I think is what it stands for. It's the law exam for pharmacy for majority of the states. So first, I'll be going over kind of like an intro of who I am, what the MPJE is. I'll go over planning. I'll go over resources I use and how I studied, and then how much I studied, and then when I got my results. So that's kind of like the breakdown of what I'm doing. Also, sorry, I hate that you can like see my hand, but I do have notes on the computer behind me, which I will be using to scroll through and make sure I cover everything I wanted to cover. But without further ado, we'll just go ahead and get started. So a little bit about me first. So my name is Katie. If you're new to my channel, welcome. So I graduated with my PharmD from University of the Pacific in Stockton, California this past May. So May 2024, depending on, I guess, when you're viewing it. This past May could be different. But I moved to Oregon recently to do my PGY1 residency. So I'm currently in Oregon, but I am from California. So kind of a little bit more about the MPJE specifically. So it's 120 questions in 2.5 hours. And it's an adaptive test, which means that the difficulty of questions change based on your performance. Now, to my knowledge, this is the only exam for pharmacy that is adaptive. The rest of them are strictly just, these are the questions you're gonna get. So it is adaptive. There are no breaks because it's only 2.5 hours, or maximum, I guess. You could finish early. And you must answer every question before moving on. There's no back nav. So I don't know about you guys in pharmacy school, but for me, for my classes, we also had no back nav, just to kind of simulate what it's going to be like when we take our boards. That way we're prepared for it. So basically just go with your gut. Don't second guess yourself and just move on, and then don't think about it again. That's kind of like the mentality. So now I'll be talking a little bit more about planning, how I kind of planned how to study for the MPJE. So around like May 28th-ish is when I was able to schedule my exams. I did graduate May 10th, so it took about like 2 weeks-ish for me to get the ATT to schedule my exams. So once I had that like scheduling available, I scheduled my MPJE for June 27th. So knowing that date in mind, which was about a month, I decided to make a study calendar. So I did start studying just under a month before my test date. So that's kind of how long I spent on MPJE. But I do want to say I was still also studying for NAPLEX at this time. So it wasn't just strictly MPJE I was studying. So that's why I wanted to start a little earlier, so that I would be able to study less MPJE for a longer period of time, instead of like taking out NAPLEX from this situation and studying a lot of MPJE for a short amount of time, just because I feel like you would retain it better. And I also wanted to keep that constant studying of NAPLEX every day, so I'd be able to pass that exam as well. I did also have to be a little bit flexible too, because I was also in the process of moving from California to Oregon, like I was mentioning. So there were some days that I had to catch up, but overall, I generally stayed pretty consistent with the schedule. I'll show you what my calendar looks like. I'll put it right there next to me. Basically what I did is I took the calendar off of the UWorld site for NAPLEX, because they have like NAPLEX pre-built calendars. And then I just modified it on Excel to kind of fit the MPJE chapters and what I wanted to study for MPJE content. Sorry, I smacked the table and the entire screen moved. But that's a general outline of what I did. But I'll go more into depth on the resources I use and how I studied, which leads me to the next section. So the main resource I would say that I used is UWorld. I bought the UWorld MPJE online course and review book. My school did not provide this since I am from California, so they provided CPJE and NAPLEX. But I contacted them and they were nice enough to provide me with a discount. So I'll put the actual pricing on the screen here, but I did pay $249 for 180-day access, which I didn't actually need the 180 days, but you never know. And it was the same price anyways, whether I bought 180 through my school's discount or 90 for the normal price. So I was just like, why not? Whatever, it's fine. So also I have the book here. So this is the book that was shipped to me. There is also an online component which consists of video lectures and an online quiz bank. I'll also put screenshots here so you can kind of see what that looks like. I'm sure UWorld's website also explains it pretty well if you're curious, and you can look at it into there. But just a quick flip through the book. It's just text. It's outlined into different chapters for each color, as you can see on the sides there. So that's what the book looks like. And let's see. So I do want to emphasize that this UWorld course does focus majority on federal law, but there are state-specific flashcards which do help point out differences from state versus federal law. It's not ideal. I wish that they did have state-specific MPJE prep. I think that would be a lot better, especially for the price, because it's pretty expensive, but it did get the job done. So it's the major platform I use for studying, and the topics on my schedule are actually chapters from the book. So I basically just studied MPJE first thing in the day so that I knew I would stay on track. Since I was also studying NAPLEX at the time, I wanted to make sure I stayed on track with MPJE, and then any additional time that I had left in the day I would use for NAPLEX. So when going through each chapter, just a general outline of what I would do, I would read and highlight first, watch the video next to kind of reinforce those concepts, type down notes, which I'll explain more in depth in a second, and use the state-specific flashcards, and then take a practice quiz to see how much I retained. So for MPJE, I didn't do one chapter a day. So my day-to-day would actually more look like reading and highlight the section that I allocated, watching those video sections, typing down those notes, and then on days where I finish a chapter, I would add state-specific flashcards and the practice quiz to my daily to-do list. Once I did get further into chapters, my day would also consist of review from previous sections too. So I'd always complete the state-specific flashcards for all chapters that I've completed every day. And they are Anki style, which if you don't know what Anki is, I also would highly recommend. It's basically like a flashcard app, which is free on the computer, but on mobile for Apple, it costs money, but on mobile for Android, it's free, at least to my understanding. But I think it's so much better than Quizlet because number one, Quizlet now you have to pay a lot of money for, I think, and there's ads every 2 seconds, so it really just disrupts from the study flow. And then number two, the Anki also gives you flashcards back based off of your performance. So when you have a flashcard, you say oh, this one was good, or it was hard, or it was really easy, and then based off of that, the program remembers that and it decides how often to give you back that flashcard, which I think is really great for promoting long-term learning and active learning. So I did also use Anki as well to study for creating different flashcards. I'll show that on the screen as well. But yes, so the UWorld state-specific flashcards were Anki style, which was very nice. And then, so I do want to backtrack a little bit and talk about the notes that I type that I explained earlier. So I do it in a fashion that allows me to quiz myself and practice active recall. So I'm going to show you my Notion page where I organize all my notes. So it's on the screen here. And here is a little snippet of some of my notes. So basically just clicking on one of those documents. As you can see here, I could test myself on the drug approval process by scrolling down through my notes. So for example, what's part of the drug approval process? Well, there's preclinical testing. So I would think, okay, well, it's performed on animals. It assesses safety and therapeutic potential, and you can file an IND application if appropriate, right? So then once I kind of test myself and say, this is what I think, I would scroll through, and then I would reveal those bullet points and be like, okay, yep, I got it. Or, oh, I forgot about that bullet point, and you kind of, it's a nice way to practice active recall without having to make flashcards, basically. But yeah, and then after that, I'd be like, oh, what's next? Like phase 1. And then I would just, continue to repeat that throughout the entirety of the document. So that's how I tend to take notes. I started doing that partway through pharmacy school, and I found that to be especially helpful. So basically, just every day, I would review some old content and then the new content that was allocated on the schedule. So that's the bulk of my studying that I did. There are also a couple of other resources that I also used that I want to talk about as well. So the next one is the NABP Survey of Law. So you'll see this one on my schedule, and it was a resource provided by my school for people like me who are getting licensed out of state. Granted, we were given an older version, so I took the information with a grain of salt as updates could have happened, but it was just nice to kind of see an outline of, I guess, like the law in a nice and easy way to read. I did like how it was organized, and I can show you a screenshot. I will blur out the answers though, since this is a paid resource. But you can see that it shows answers for every state. Like on the left-hand side, you'll see like all the states listed, which is super nice. It's like one resource for a bunch of states. So I think that's why the school paid for it, because you don't know where your students are getting licensed. So yeah, but here's the pricing. It looks like my school didn't purchase the license for 2024 because we had like an old version, but they did do the company-wide in 2023, which is expensive. But if you think about it, it's for all your students, $2,500. Not crazy. I mean, we do pay a lot of tuition, so. But yeah, if you do have this resource available to you though, I would recommend looking at it. It's really nice to go through. If not, you could purchase it for $195, but that's something you have to decide for yourself. It is quite pricey. You wouldn't need all of the state's information unless you're planning on getting licensed in multiple states. Then it might be really helpful for you, but otherwise it might be better for you to maybe get a cheaper resource that is only for the state you're planning on getting licensed in. But the next resource that I used is the TLDR, which stands for Too Long Don't Read. I also use that for Oregon law, which is on the website www.tldrpharmacy.com. They provide MPJE cheat sheets for each state in both filled out and unfilled out versions. So the filled out version is $75 and the non-filled out version is $25. Honestly, I think it's worth the extra $50, but the non-filled option would be a good choice if you do want just a template to fill out and you want to find the answers yourself, like on the Board of Pharmacy website. So it depends what your goals are and what you want to do, and I guess how much time you have to study, but honestly, I think the $50 is worth it to just get a filled out cheat sheet. But once again, I don't want to put paid resources out on the internet for free because I want to respect their business. So I'll show a blurred out screenshot of what it looks like. On the screenshot here, you can see that everything is listed out really nicely, kind of similar to the NABP Survey of Law, but it is more concise, and also it's less states. It's only one state. So $75 for one state, or $195 basically for multiple states through the NABP. So something to consider. But the final resource that I used is the Board of Pharmacy website, which is probably one of the best resources to use because you'd be getting your information like right from the source. But I will admit though, it's not really fun to read unless you really like law, which I feel like most of us in pharmacy don't really like it that much. But I don't know, maybe you do. But at least it's free. So I can show you a full screenshot, and you can also look at it yourself on the internet. But for example, this is what chapter 855 looks like. There's tabs of each division, and then in those tabs there's tabs for different sections within the divisions, and I basically just read through the website at the end of the studying to reinforce the information that I've learned from my other resources and kind of see if there's anything that I missed, or like those resources didn't point out that maybe it might be good to know, like read over it once so I know it for the exam. But if those other resources didn't point it out, it might not be the most important, but you never know. I probably should have used the Board of Pharmacy website more than I did. But honestly, for me, it's really hard to learn from just purely reading paragraphs, especially if they're kind of dry. No offense to the Board of Pharmacy, but it is a little dry. So that's why I opted for other resources such as UWorld that did have those like practice quiz components that I was able to set up quizzes for myself to practice my knowledge and kind of gauge where I am at an understanding. But the not so nice thing about that is it is mostly federal law. So I did have to just remember state-specific differences from federal law, but the federal law is nice to know and helpful, especially if the question is like based on federal law, or if you're wanting to get licensed in another state, because having that federal law knowledge as a backbone, you can say, okay, like how does this state differ from federal law, and how does this state differ from federal law? So take that as you will, but I just do want to mention that these last three resources that I talked about, so the NAPP Survey of Law, the TLDR, and the Board of Pharmacy website, I reviewed near the end of my studying. So looking back at my study schedule here, I only wrote down the NAPP Survey of Law, but I did use all of these in conjunction during that time, as well as the final days leading up to my exam date. I just didn't edit my study schedule, but I could just verbally say it, it's fine. But the final resource that I want to talk about that I used, which I think is a highly helpful, really helpful, and I highly recommend, is the NABP pre-MPJE exam. So this resource has actual MPJE questions from previous years, which is really nice. It has 40 questions in 50 minutes, so the cost is $75 for this exam. And the nice thing about this is that you can see the formatting and the style of questions that may be asked on your MPJE. You do get a score at the end of the you do get a score at the end of the exam, but you do not get a report. So you don't see the sections that you need to work on, but you do see your total scaled score. So you can see if you're ready for the exam or not. You probably know this, but you would need a scaled score of 75 or higher to pass. I will say when I took the pre-MPJE exam, I did get a skill score of 74. So I knew I might be cutting it close, but I took those final last few days before the exam to review any concepts that I wasn't 100% on, and just reviewed those and make sure I was a little more familiar with them so that I would be ready for my exam when exam date rolled around. Now, if you did score significantly lower than 74, I would probably recommend, or 75, sorry. I would probably recommend that you postpone your exam to a later date if you can, just so that you allow yourself more time to study and that you are prepared for your exam date. Okay, so that kind of sums up the resources. I'm now going to talk about how much I studied. So I will preface this by saying that I study a lot. These hours may or may not shock you depending on how much you study, but in total for the MPJE, I studied 84 hours and 23 minutes. So calculating that over the span of like 25 days, that's averaging 3 to 3.5 hours of MPJE studying a day. As I mentioned earlier, I was also studying NAPLEX at the time too. And also, I was a little more familiar with California law than Oregon law in school. So maybe it might account for that. I'm not really sure, but basically, I use the app YPT to track my study time, and as you can see here on the screen, I started studying more MPJE heavy closer to the exam date. MPJE is in the gray color. So in the beginning, I was studying like more NAPLEX with MPJE, and then I moved, so I didn't really study much at all for anything, and then I studied more MPJE heavy. So that's kind of my progression of what I did. It all depends if you take MPJE first or NAPLEX first, or what's happening with you, but that's generally my schedule and what I did. But finally, I do want to talk about when I got my results, because I know this is what everyone's dying to know. It was what I was dying to know, and the waiting period was absolutely terrible, but I took my exam on June 27th. And I got my results July 10th. So it took 13 business days for me to get my results. And I did have to go through 4th of July, which was very painful because I added an extra day to it because it's a holiday. So that wasn't fun. But overall, don't be discouraged. If you do feel like you failed after you walk out of that exam, everyone feels like that. No one really feels confident. I was talking with my co-residents. We all, after it, were like, I don't know. I have no idea. Like, So the waiting period is the worst, but it's okay. If you have the NAPLEX after like I did, I was like, I did all I could. Time to focus on the NAPLEX and study for that. If I fail MPJE, that's okay. I will worry about it after I take my NAPLEX. But luckily for me, I didn't have to, so that was very good. But overall, that's pretty much how I studied and prepared for the MPJE. I hope that helped you to get an idea of how at least I studied, and maybe you can cherry pick, I guess, here and there what you want and study that way, because I know everyone studies differently, so my methods won't work with everyone that's watching this, which is totally fine. But the purpose of this was to just kind of outline what I did, which I think did help me pass the first time, and overall kind of give you ideas if you're struggling with how and when to start studying. But that's it for me. Thank you for watching, and good luck with your exam. I know you got this. And I post videos I post videos every single Sunday. I hope to see you back again next week. Bye.